And I've had results in life that are prodigious. And that came from tricks. I just learned a few basic tricks from people like my grandfather. There are all kinds of tricks that I just got into by accident in life. One, I invert all the time. It's like a lot of practical problems in algebra. If you invert, you can solve it easily. If you don't, you can't solve it easily.
Exactly right.
And so, of course, I had that trick very early. And approaching it in reverse that way, I got better results. And I got the right bag of tricks early. And of course, it's been of enormous help to me. You've got to do this in 3 dimensions. You know, God gave us 3 dimensions.
It's only after you've reached that upside downness, then things are finished. And then the world has to reboot. You avert a total apocalypse. You restart with the origin. You create a new hierarchy based on the basic elements of what created that thing in the first place. The only thing you can do is you dive back into the origin. You go down into the water, and you find that golden ball, that first spark. You pull it out of the water, and you start the cycle again.
That characterize financial markets, negative and positive. Negative feedback, he argues, is self-correcting, while positive feedback is self-reinforcing. Negative feedback sets up a tendency towards equilibrium, while positive feedback produces...
With monsters, lest ye become a monster. Yeah. And if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you.
Right. But I would say, bring it on. Right? Because that's why I also say, knowing that he's absolutely right, but if you gaze into the abyss long enough, you see the light, not the darkness.
Are you sure about that?
I'm betting my life on it.
Yeah, that's a heck of a bet.
Well, that's...
Because it might distort your mind to where all you see...
is abyss.
Is abyss.
Yeah.
Is the evil in this world.
Well, then I would say you haven't looked long enough.
I was 14 years old. And I would say that that's when my character was made. that one should think ahead, one should understand and anticipate events, and one is threatened. It was a tremendous threat of evil. I mean, it was a very personal experience of evil.
These are all attempts at creating a new kind of school or a new kind of monastery. And Bjornstrand talks about the concept of reserves, islands of safety, where history can be remembered and the human being can continue to function in order to maintain the species through a dark age. And the purpose of this underground is to find out how to preserve the light, life, the culture, how to keep things living. And I think that in order to create that language, you're going to have to learn how you can go through a looking glass into another kind of perception where you have that sense of being united to all things, and suddenly you understand everything.
I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I think I will use the word doomed in the long term.
There's good reason to believe that we are looking at a potential collapse of confidence in the U.S. dollar and indeed the entire international monetary system. The international monetary system is based on the dollar, so the dollar goes, the system goes.
So I believe the Fed is going to pivot to prevent that massive financial crisis. And so what we're going to get is a sovereign debt crisis and a U.S. dollar crisis. So it's going to take the form of a crashing dollar.
For foreign economies, the wide use of the dollar allows borrowers to have access to a broad pool of lenders and investors.
According to the International Monetary Fund, nearly $7 trillion US dollars are held by 149 countries.
In 2019, some 88% of international transactions involved US dollars. No other currencies came close.
When you think about what's required to have the world's reserve currency, it needs to be freely convertible. China's currency is not. They have capital controls. You need an independent central bank. You need large and liquid debt markets.
This is why I think a dollar collapse actually is quite unlikely, because the implications of a dollar collapse are that you would have a real search for safety, and the only really safe place to put lots of money remains the US.
While the pandemic did cause volatility in the price of the dollar, its value today hasn't seen much decline compared to prices before the pandemic.
And, the reason the dollar is strengthening, comes from multiple sources. The first is anytime you have uncertainty and geopolitical risks and macroeconomic uncertainty around the world, the dollar benefits as safe haven status. So that's one. The second is the Fed's been much more aggressive in hiking rates than its peer banks, whether it's the ECB or the Bank of Japan. So that's, again, strengthening the dollar. And then third, of course, you referenced the pound, where there's sort of idiosyncratic reasons.
You're looking at a market today that has produced $100 for every dollar. All you was had to believe in America, just buy a cross-section of America. You didn't have to read the Wall Street Journal. You didn't have to look up the price of your stock. You didn't have to pay a lot of money in fees to anybody. You just had to believe that the American miracle was intact.
I don't know how else better to say it, but this is a dollar story and will remain a dollar story for some time.
But it's the third month in a row where year-over-year growth has slowed. Month to month, we're seeing a slowdown with these numbers. Some real estate agencies are already seeing prices drop. By the way, Zillow's latest market report found that nationally, home values lost 0.3% from July to August.
All right, we got some more bad news on the state of the housing sector today. Single family starts tumbling more than 10%, while a full 16+% of homes that went under contract in July were canceled. That's the highest number ever on record, with the exception of the early days of the pandemic. Are we, as the National Association of Home Builders said, in a housing recession?
Do you remember back in March of 2020 when the Federal Reserve said they would print as much money as possible to make sure that markets are backstopped? They would bail out everything. They would bail out corporate bonds, they'd bail out public bonds, city bonds, municipal bonds, small businesses, big businesses, your credit cards, your car loan, your home loans. They would bail out literally everything.
The question is, with the Fed expected to make at least a 75 basis point hike today and announce it, are we going to see rates move even higher? We're already some rates at 6.5. Are we moving past 7%?
The pace of sales volume is completely collapsing today, and there's no signs of a slowdown in the pace of the decline. The volume of new home sales is down 51% since August 2020.
Here's the current heat map of all the overvalued areas in America, over 2/3. And let me just tell you, we're just getting started.
As well as faulty assumptions, the Russian initial thrust also stalled due to Ukrainian tactics and stiffer resistance than Moscow expected. Rather than head-on combat against a larger force, Ukrainian forces have been skilled at adapting, ambushing Russian forces and targeting senior Russian officers with snipers, using drones which can carry explosives to target convoys, and using military aid from the West.
Russia says the first phase of its war in Ukraine is over. Its military leaders claim the invasion has been a success so far, and its troops will now concentrate on winning full control of the eastern Donbas region. On the whole, the main objectives of the first stage of the operation have generally been accomplished. The combat potential of the armed forces of Ukraine has been considerably reduced, which makes it possible to focus on the main efforts to achieve the main goal.
All oil that's traded globally is currently pegged to the US dollar. It's denominated in the US dollar.
The U.S. goes and bombs Baghdad in 2003, sets up military bases, and look where they put them. Kind of like that plan they talked about at Camp David, right? Well, fast forward to today. The number of bases are down, but the important ones left still by those oil fields.
In central London, large-scale sit-ins continue, with more than 300 arrested so far.
To ready itself for the new green world, BP has plans to cut its oil output by 40% between now and 2030.
And when you talk about oil in the cold winter, there was a note that I believe your team put out that you do see the potential for $100 per barrel oil in the United States and elsewhere based on what supplies are doing.
When you get into these low inventories, price spike, and then they come back down because what happens?
As a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally, and we do that by buying treasury bills or bonds or other government guaranteed securities. That actually increases the money supply. We also print actual currency, and we distribute that through the Federal Reserve banks.
Time is the progression of existence in which we move towards the future from the present, and in doing so create the past.
Inversion is a process whereby an object has its entropy reversed, essentially flipping its chronology, so that from that point on, it goes backwards in time rather than forwards.
So instead of viewing time moving from the present into the future, it inverts this perspective and allows objects and the characters to move through the flow of time from the present into the past.